Hi, it's Clark on Temptress. Today I'm going to do a review of the Redodo 165 amp hour battery. Redodo asked me to do this review a while ago, and I looked at its specs and I knew right off this is either going to be one of my favorite batteries or one of my least favorite batteries. Let's see how it turned out. Okay, we've got here the Redodo 165. They seem to be going through a little change at Redodo. You can see the graphics are a little less in your face as they were, but they've made some changes that are very interesting. Number one, if you watch my old review videos, you know I'm begging the battery companies to stop selling us foam. So many batteries were using a case that fit maybe the initial batteries available, and then as the actual cells got smaller from the manufacturer, battery companies like Redodo don't make cells. They buy them from other people. They would fill the space with foam, and I was suggesting, hey, give us smaller cases. And they did. There are now these, subgroup 24-ish size 100 amp hour batteries. Good on them. Well, Redodo's done something new. This is 165 amp hours in a group 31 case. Well, group 31 case, if you look around, that's basically where the 100 amp hour batteries are, being shipped in right now. So they bought bigger cells and they put them in this battery case. That means we don't have to waste our precious storage space on our camper or our boat. Of course, houses, you've got always another shelf you can use. Storing basically foam. So this is really good. The battery also, they've added some structure to the cells. I've seen a few batteries do this, but for the most part, nobody's doing this. They're just kind of taking the cells and strapping them together with some like fiberglass tape. It's always been accepted in the build your battery at home group that the very best thing you can do for your cells is to actually stack them up and then put some aluminum or metal plates on the ends and then bolt them down and put them under a bit of compression. I guess when they get near harm's way, or maybe when time goes on, they can build some gases which can blow things out, kind of inflate them, and that's not good for them. And the best thing is to actually just retain that, put it in a corset, as it were. Well, Redodo's done that. They've got some structure in there holding the cells together. They're claiming that, and probably rightly so, that it dissipates heat better, which basically implies they used aluminum plates. So good on them for that. They've got a BMS in here that has some tricks. It has low temperature protection, which, if you're not going to be on a boat in the tropics, is important. You charge these guys once when they're below freezing. Don't expect them to ever work again, ever. So very expensive mistake. The BMS will stop that from happening. It doesn't have a heating blanket inside. The heating blanket would let it actually move some of that power into the heater, warm up the batteries, and then accept power. I don't know. You would have to decide if that's really critical for you, but one is about safety. The other one is like getting one extra day worth of morning power. I just can't imagine a world where that matters. I have a camper. I like this for the camper. The heating blanket approach, that's fine, but I just don't think it's that important, really. I might miss half a day's sun until the batteries warm up. No big deal. The BMS also has a pretty high discharge rating. It can put out a lot of power. It's a 165 amp hour battery. It can put out like 165 amps. So it can put out 1C. It's kind of what you'd expect. The 100 amp hour batteries tend to put out, 100 amps. But a lot of the bigger batteries, they're just putting smaller BMSs in them. So there are some 200 amp hour batteries out there that can only put out 100 amps. There are some 400s that can put out 200. Maybe that doesn't matter so much because 200 is a lot. I could live my life on 200 amps at any given time. This guy alone can put out 165-ish amps. Great. It's a digital BMS, and quite often they shut right down at that number. This does have some tolerance built into it. So for 1 second, you could have 800 amps plus, and that's good for like starting induction motors on your inverter, AC loads. And I think it's 5 seconds at a little bit above 500 amps. So they're comfortable numbers. You shouldn't be pushing it any more than that, just for the battery cells themselves. Really, they don't want to discharge faster than 1C, and they don't want to be charged at more than 0.5C, of course, like any lithium iron phosphate battery. If you're unfamiliar with C, that'll be our little lesson in this video. The C rating of a battery is kind of its amps flow, which is the amount of power that's coming out through the terminals, compared to the amp hours of the battery. Such that if you have a 165 amp hour battery and you're pulling 165 amps out of it, that's 1C. If you're pulling, 82.5 amps, that would be 0.5C. So I like all that about the battery. I really am tickled that there's so many amp hours in such a small case. Well, what I was concerned with is I just did a review of the LI Time 140. It was a starter battery, but it wasn't the battery that gave me problems so much. It was the BMS and the app. I finally decided I couldn't even live with it for my own use, and I did a video on ripping it apart and putting a good BMS in it. I was concerned that basically since this battery came out within a month or so of the LI Time, maybe they both grabbed that same BMS. It looks like not. They're different. Is this the greatest BMS in the world? Can't really say yet. There's some things I don't like about it. Probably most of this video will be talking about its BMS, but that's kind of how it always goes. The BMS is the brains of the battery, and it defines its personality. The BMS and the app that goes with it is your interface into what's going on inside. If you buy a battery without Bluetooth, then, well, all you can do is see the voltage at the terminals. What I think the single biggest thing I want to know on the app, what I want to see on my phone when I have it hooked to this battery is, what is the voltage of every individual cell? That tells me about cell balance. It tells me about a bunch of things. And sadly, the app they put out doesn't give you the cell voltages. So, for all purposes, this becomes a battery without an app, as it were. You've got to do your balancing when you get this battery like it's a battery that doesn't have Bluetooth at all. The Bluetooth gives you some things. It gives you a remote display of the amps going in or out, the voltage of the whole battery. It sort of tells you when the battery has shut down and not accepting charging anymore, except it kind of doesn't. Apparently there's a couple different reasons why it would shut down and not accept charging, and it only tells you about one of them. I find the app not very useful. I'm really hoping, and this is to you guys at Redodo, that you upgrade the app. I believe that the BMS is actually putting out all the information that you need to do what you should be doing. And you've taken away from us the ability to see the voltage of the individual cells. Get your programmers to update the app, give us that information, and make it available for people who bought the batteries like now. And I think you guys will. You notice I'm not opening the battery case. I did the last, few. I did the video on how to balance the battery without opening the case. And I kind of feel like I'm breaking my own rules when I open the case and get right in there and put a resistor on an individual cell and balance it up in one evening. So I decided I have to live by my own rules, and I decided I have to say this battery is useless if it can't be balanced, and I need to be able to balance it without opening it, because nobody in the field, you're not going to open a battery. So I did. It took a while. My procedure worked. Follow the procedure on that when you first buy a battery video, how to balance. And it will work with this battery. The problem with it is it has passive balancing, like most batteries of this ilk do. That's not a bad thing, but it does mean it doesn't move a lot of power out of the cells to balance them. What balancing is basically is you charge all the cells like right up to the limit, and the one that has too high of a voltage gets discharged compared to the others, individually discharged. Well, this is what happens, and I can tell it's happening by remote control because I can tell it's getting warm inside the battery. Not hot, but it went up 3-4 degrees Fahrenheit, and that was the battery dissipating that energy out of the one cell. The problem is it looks like they're still balancing at 100 milliamps, more or less, I'm guessing. And this is a big battery with big cells. So at first, kind of looked like nothing was happening, and I let it go and I let it go, and I kept recharging it up and making sure it was in its little balance mode for over a week. And as batteries go, at first you don't see much, but then I started seeing a goodly amount, and it's balanced within my requirements now. So it can be balanced, but you got to be real patient. Expect to camp out with it, babysitting it for, well, it's not like I was there 24 hours a day for a week, but it's going to take like a week of maybe discharging it a bit, recharging it up slowly twice a day. I used these bench power supplies. I've got a link to this one in that video. It's a fine one. It's not the greatest thing in the world. They're Chinesium, but they do the job. They're not expensive. If you're going to be balancing a whole bunch of lithium batteries, it's worth $30 or so. Also, a bench power supply, it's just one of those tools. Like, I remember the first time a good friend of mine loaned me an angle grinder, and I kind of didn't want to borrow it. Maybe I was afraid of it. And he said, no, Clark, you need this for that job. I went home and used it. And it's like, how have I lived without you all my life? There's just certain tools like that. A bench power supply is one of them. It lets you get complete control over amps and volts. And I know probably right now you don't have a good reason why you think you would need to have complete control over those. But if you're charging batteries, it is so helpful. And just using one for a little while, you'll figure out how they work. If you want more information, I have that master class, I call it, on how electricity works, with what Ohm's law is and such. Highly recommend that. Anyway, back to the battery. I like it. I know I keep saying this about batteries but it's going in my camper. This will be the end of it. The modified LI time is in the camper. I forget what it was, SOG, the big 300 amp hour is in there. And I just checked, there's room for this one. They don't weigh that much, so I'm gonna add this to the mix. That'll give me like 650 amp hours of lithium batteries in that camper. That's really ridiculous. I could probably run the air conditioner every night with the truck up in the forest where the solar panels don't do anything for like 3-4 days. But that's flexibility, and that's why we want batteries. As far as the rest of the testing, I have had this on my bench for almost 2 weeks. It's been extensively tested. I've given it 2 cycles to find its capacity. Both times were pretty close to 170 amp hours. One time was like 170 and a half. The other was like 168. More than 165, so cool. I didn't do the thermals that I often do because I haven't opened the case, but I did still run this big heat gun. And this was about 1700 watts. Ran it for 20 minutes. Checked the temperature through the BMS, and it only went up to, I think it was 84 degrees at the end. So I know the wires aren't getting super hot or anything, because this is basically an oven. If you make any heat in there, it's got to go someplace. And nothing was getting terribly hot. So, Redodo's always done a good job with their internals. I feel comfortable saying that's a good battery inside. Let's take a look at the leaderboard now, go through and compare it to the neighbors, compare it to the other things. If you go down to the description on any of these videos, you'll find a link to the leaderboard, the actual spreadsheet. And I highly recommend you go there. Not only do you get all the batteries and their good and their bad points, but there's links, and the links are, well, the best prices I found at the time. I'm getting them. Sometimes it's Amazon, sometimes it's not. Sometimes going right to the company is the better deal. Well, let's go down the list. As I said, capacity, we're going to give this an excellent because, does what's on the label. The cells, Redodo's always used, good cells. They don't appear to balance their batteries before they go out. I've talked to them about this, and they say, yeah, we do. But they just sit on the shelf for so long, and I think they're lying to me. I think they just take the cells, charge them up once, ship them, expect you to balance them. That's why it's important, if you really want good performing batteries, to actually go through a balancing procedure yourself on any battery. I have personally had a Redodo with a bad cell some time ago. In fact, it's still on Temptress. I just modified the BankManager, so I only used 80%. I left the bottom 20% out, and works fine. A couple other people have told me they've had little hit and miss. So in short, I'm going to give it a great because for the most part, they're great. It's just track record, and I have no real way of, knowing what's inside. Build quality. I've been throwing the BMS into the build quality part, but it includes all the stuff, case and all. Extra points for getting more cells in this Group 31 case. I'm really tickled about that. The BMS part of it, oh, you can make that so good, Redodo. Just give us the cell voltages. I would think I'll be happy. I'm going to give that a good. And it would be a great if you just gave us the cell voltage information. The company, I got to give them an excellent. I've had a lot of people get back to me with problems with batteries. I've got patrons, and they said, Clark, I got these 3 Redodos, and 2 of them are great, but this one isn't. And I'll give them a set of tests to run so that when they contact Redodo, they can say, I run these tests. Would you put those past your engineer? And it gets them past the whole, would you do this? Would you do this? A set of tests that proves that they're bad. Now, they've had some bad batteries out there. They sell a lot of batteries. And of course, I'm only going to hear about the bad ones. But in every case, they've made good. They've sent out a new battery. So I got to give them an excellent. They actually answer their phone, unlike a lot of battery companies. And they're not crazy expensive like Battleborn or even VoltGo, SOG. I think Redodo's got a porridge isn't too hot, the porridge isn't too cold. It's just right. And they're standing behind their product. So excellent company. Cost to value comes down to about, last I checked, $2 an amp hour. That's a reasonable price. You can get cheaper batteries, but then you're going to get 100 amp hour batteries. I think generally you're going to pay more for that if you get a 200 or bigger, and they're also in bigger cases. I think that's a great cost to value. As I've said before, that's a hard choice. For some people, it doesn't matter what you spend. I just want every bell and every whistle. And, I understand that. When you got the money, what the hell? Some people, it's $50 matters. That's $50 I can't go out to dinner with my wife. So I think this is a good fit. It costs maybe a little more, but I think where they spent the money, worth it. That's my review of the Redodo. I was worried for a while last week that this was going to be a really horrible battery, but once I got it balanced, it's one of my favorites. I gotta like it. Bye from Clark on Temptress.